Thank you all for coming tonight. We want to welcome you to a presentation by Tom Wooten, Samish Tribal Chairman, and he's going to be sharing some information about the Indians of Guemes. Since 2002, the Guemes Island Historical Societies had a strong presence in the community under the leadership of President Win Anderson and others, but it was dissolved several years ago after the passing of Tom Deach. In the interim, we want to thank the Guemes Island Library for taking on the fiduciary role, and also a big thank you to the church for allowing us to use the office and the meeting room every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. About a year and a half ago, a small team of us got together to pick up where the Historical Society had left off to renew their dream of building a small museum preserving collected photos and artifacts. The options to create a museum was taken up by the Vision Committee. Discussion included to enlarge the current hall by adding a room or building a standalone building on the community property, and the committee had even hired an architect to create a building complex that included a new hall, library, and museum. We invite you to check out our website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. Also, the Washington State Rural Heritage website has a Guemes Island Heritage branch where you'll find about 150 fascinating photos of old-time Guemes. Our archivist, Claudia England, continues to add photos, and Line Time has a cache of Guemes historical articles as well. Our mission statement is the Guemes Island Historical Society mission is to lead an inclusive, multi-generational community to discover, preserve, and promote Guemes Island history through an array of fun, volunteer-led activities. We are still accepting historical photos and artifacts, and charitable donations are always welcome. And if you would like to become a friend of the Guemes Island Historical Society, please provide your name and email address, and we will keep you updated on the latest happenings and events. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Eric Veal.
Up in Eden Cemetery. We just put my mom to rest up there a month and a half ago or so. So anyway, this island is near and dear to my family and to me especially. And the Wooten family isn't the only one. With me today is my good friends, the Blackingtons, who are a big part of this family as well, or this island as well. So, started doing these history talks. It kind of got out of control. I did one, I don't know, what was it, 2 months ago or 3 months ago, and it went out, and some of you guys were kind enough to come to that. And it was like, oh, well, so Donna came, and she goes, hey, it'd be really neat to get you over here to do this talk so that we all could get together and hear the same story. And so I accepted the invitation to come over here, and that's why we're here today. But I do want you guys to share this and learn from it, and hopefully it'll spark those memories that we all have that are buried deep back in your memory. One of the things I do want to start out with is I'm going to ask Pat to help me sing a song. You guys all know Rosie James. Her son, Lewis, has this beautiful song, and it's an honoring song. And unfortunately, Rosie, I don't think she's here. She lost her eldest son not too long ago. And so I would like to kind of honor the family and share this honoring song of her son Lewis's. And it came to him on Canoe Journey. And that's flattered and pancake. It is pretty cool.
It's the way I sing though.
We're going to do it anyway.
Pat.
Okay. You ready? All right.
Okay, I guess.
Way, hey, hey, oh, hey, oh. Way, hey, hey, oh, hey, oh. Ah, hey, ah. Hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh. I apologize for the flat drum, but they're like barometers, right? When it gets moist out. What do I need to do here? I need to get out of this. So bear with me here, folks. Uh-oh. Let's see, end show. I see what I gotta do. Okay. I gotta load it all back up, folks. Sorry about that. Must have happened when I got unplugged. Uh-oh. Where's my technician?
Yeah, hello.
Where's JR?
Not just the secretary.
Yeah, no, are we not plugged in, right?
It's plugged in.
Hey
It just,
everybody, in the meantime, there's a few chairs over here if anybody wants to sit down. Just
Wanna
one-
unplug it and plug it back in?
Yep, the old trickle room.
Yeah.
Come on. Oh, wait,
Oh.
here, there we go. Well, but why are you, oh, now start your PowerPoint.
I think go to slideshow. Probably sees it as a second.
There we go. All right. That was scary, wasn't it? All right. So again, I'd like to take full credit for this presentation, but I would be lying. The tribe actually has a young man named, and I guess he isn't even, well, everybody's pretty much young to me anymore, but we've got a fella named Jason Tickner who's our archivist who will be happy to accept that mortar, and you're not getting to take that home. But he puts these presentations together, and he put this one together. And again, we started this because just like you all, our citizens wanted to know more about our history. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how all of this happened and why there's a limited amount of history about the new village. So the purpose of this presentation is to illuminate one of the more mysterious parts of the Samish history, and that being the new Guemes village. The village was an anomaly since it was established at a time when settlers were arriving in the territory. In fact, the village lasted 20 years into Washington statehood. Despite the short lifespan of the village, its impacts have been lasting, and the Samish nation would not exist in its current form today without those two Indians who filed homestead applications and their friends who stood by as witnesses for them. So again, you guys have seen this. So this is the 1898 USGS map of Guemes Island. And this is an excerpt, and you can see there it says Guemes Village on West Shore. An elusive village. So one of the problems that we have is there wasn't a whole lot of writing about the village. So really a lack of sources. So primary sources regarding the Guemes village, today we are unaware of the reason for the 1880 founding of the village, what people at the village did, or even why Guemes was chosen as a site for the village. Why first of those living there may not have had the ability to write about it, since school and education were not widely available to Washington natives. And even if individual Samishes did write, few considered village life worth writing about. And you know, the boarding schools and stuff didn't happen really until about this time, the 1880s. So education wasn't a possibility for them, unless they were a mixed family. Second of those who dwelled at the village may not have wanted to talk about the village. Many lives there lived there, so they did not have to go to the reservation. Reservations came with their own problems such as disease, missionaries and BIA agents, and now today, you know, it's really the fentanyl and drug problems are really bad on reservations. So that's a new problem that they're having to deal with. Surviving sources, so where did we gather this information for this presentation? Newspaper articles, accounts of people who visited the village, letters which complain about the village, maps that noted the village's location like the one we just saw, and then a directory listing. The issue with many of these sources is that they are all sources from those who are looking at the village from the outside and best provide evidence that the village was there. There's only one source known that from a resident of the village, though it is an interview that was from 50 years after the fact. While there are field notes, there are yet to be restricted and unavailable for research. So Jason's talking about Professor Wayne Settles, who did his thesis on the Samish village. Residents of the village did not want to advertise the existence of their village. Indians were treated poorly in the Washington Territory, and isolation of the village was seen as a benefit rather than a loss. You all know what a great place that west side of the island is. In 1880, the Indians could not be U.S. citizens, which meant that Indian men could not vote, and they had little influence in local government. Indian women, like white women at the time, couldn't vote either, you know, and I hope you all got your ballots in the mailbox, and I hope you all are voting in the right direction, because you don't need to go backwards, right? This meant the Indians were not treated justly in the legal system, since juries usually found in favor of the settler no matter what the crime was. This meant that white men could get away with murder of an Indian and the jury would refuse to convict them. And that's a fact. Settlers were hostile to Indians. The Indian villages were on cleared lands near resources, and settlers believed they could use the land better than the Indians could. Settlers found ways to take Indian land, and Indians had little resources or recourse. And that's a fact. If you guys could imagine what this island and all the islands around here looked like when the first settlers got here, you know, you think about how beautiful they look today with all the trees on them. If you look at Cypress Island or even Guemes, you know, you look at all the trees. It's funny, we were talking about Eden Cemetery, how neat it must have looked being all logged off, right? Because you could see the sunset over the cemetery. And now it's all grown up, right? Well, all that's been logged off. There were huge, huge trees here on the island. And that was one of the resources that people wanted to take advantage of, was the timber, of course, right? And so, but there were also cleared areas where the tribes have been using for millennia. They would do burns on the islands here so that they could raise camas for their diet. So you guys know that they use camas. There weren't potatoes here, right? So that's what they used as a starch in their diet, was the camas bulbs. But the cleared areas, like March's Point, where the two refineries are, that was all cleared. That's why the settlers, monks and March and Barkhausen, and they all moved in because it was all cleared already, right? They didn't have to do anything. Yeah, Kavanaugh's too, absolutely.
But the one thing about the Camas I'd just like to let you know is that there are tribes. Sam Barr is the head of it, and he has a Camas festival every year down on Whidbey Island. We went to it last year, and it's the first time I've ever eaten Camas. But anybody's welcome. There are like 5 or 6 tribes that help with that.
And it was good. I've never had it. It's actually pretty
Like a sweet. Small.
So the cleared land was really desirable, and they wanted the Indians off of it so that they could raise cattle and plant cherry trees like down here on the corner. And, yeah. So here's some quotes reflecting the hostility of the settlers in Western Washington. And this guy's name's James Tellock. His diary, page 11, regards Orcas Island. Colonel May, located on the claim near North Beach, where he had a band of the worst Indian characters, always camping under the leadership of the outlaw Indian known as Old Tom, to whose credit more than one murder was attributed. And here's another one from the Northwest Enterprise, which you guys know that the Northwest Enterprise was the paper from Anacortes. Amos Bowman founded the Northwest Enterprise, which is interesting because keep in mind that when the settlers got here in the 1850s, right, what was going on right here? There was actually Pacific Northwest Wars. You guys know that the wars weren't just in the Midwest and were down in Arizona. There was hostility not here, but further south down by Olympia. And it actually, I mean, it was a full-on war. The people that lived here, the settlers that were here, were actually frightened as well, and some of them moved up to Bellingham, up to Wooten, to fort up to be safe during those hostile times. But not only was the Indian War happening in the 1850s and the settlers were coming in, like for myself, my family, they came from North Carolina, 2 brothers. They came out this way looking for gold. They weren't the oldest back, you know how it is, how the oldest male of the family gets the farm, right? I don't know if it's still like that, but that's how it used to be. So if you were a younger sibling, you're on your own. You had to go find your own way. And so these 2 brothers, Richard and Shadrach, came out and they walked across the Isthmus of Panama and took a ship up to San Francisco. They missed the gold rush there. They had heard about the gold up at the Fraser River. So that was going on at the same time. There was a gold rush on the Fraser River. And keep in mind that Washington Territory was co-owned or claimed by Canada and the U.S. There's the Treaty of Oregon. Do you guys know about that? So the Crown and the United States actually agreed to, it's called the Treaty of Oregon, to co-manage this area in Washington Territory because of the dispute of where it's not always the 49th parallel, right? When you get here, it's which side of San Juan Island do you guys want to have the border on? Obviously, the Canadians wanted it on the other side of San Juan. Well, they didn't get it. The U.S. did. So that was going on as well. And there was this little other thing called the American Civil War that was going on, right? It was all building up. You think, okay, Civil War, no big deal, right? It's back east. Well, guess what? All those people that were here came from back east, either up north or down south. So depending on, if you look at the Enterprise newspaper that was written at the time, it's pro-federal. So if you were from the south, if you were, what did they call them, you guys? Somebody help me out here. Copperheads. So if you were a copperhead, they didn't like you and you didn't get any press. And yeah, so a lot of things were going on at the same time when this area was being settled. Here's another excerpt from the Northwest Enterprise, and again, that's Amos Bowman's newspaper. Troublesome Siwash on Samish Island is camped a party of roving Indians consisting of several families who have been living there for some time past. These Siwashes are a source of considerable annoyance at times to settlers living in the neighborhood, as they are little are in the habit of getting drunk and acting in a various disorderly manner, even prowling around the houses of settlers and openly abusing the inmates. These impudent scoundrels should be taken in charge by some of Uncle Sam's ornamental agents and be compelled to reside on the reservation where they belong, right? That's where they belong. So this is, again, the local paper, painting a pretty good picture, I guess. So again, the tribe, and let's go a little bit before Samish Island. So the tribe actually had, and I'll explain it in one of the slides, and I found it last time I presented it. Jason had it chronological order a little bit out, but the Samish tribe actually was a huge tribe that lived in this area. There was a village before West Shore Village on the south end of the island, so on the channel side. And everything that I've read, it says west of the ferry landing, right? So if we go ferry landing west, so it would be this way, right? So I think,
Blackington property.
so, but if you guys know this, and I was talking to Bud about this, the actual original ferry landing was further east, right? Just a little bit. So it could have been kind of like where the lagoon is. And yeah, the name of the village was Schwaimen, and it was a huge village. It had a stockade as well as a huge plank house. And why did it have a stockade? Well, the reason why it had a stockade is because at the time, right, before Washington State, there were northern raiders from Canada and Alaska that would come down here and slave. And you think, oh, slavery, right? South, right? No, that's not true at all. Well, it's true, but the tribes here also slaved. And in fact, the Treaty of 1855, there's a clause in there that all the tribes that signed the treaty agreed to no longer take slaves and possess slaves. The whole economy was built on a slave trade, especially up north. Like the tribe from Cape Alaska, the Haida and the Tlinkits, their whole economy was built on slave trade. And so they would come down here and take women and children, kill the men, and take them back to Alaska, and they would actually trade slaves. They would execute them as a show of their power or their wealth, right? Because they were property. So that was going on at the time. So the tribe had a huge stockade to keep those northern raiders from taking the women and kids. So that was Schwaimen. That village got so big that they built another village across the channel in Anacortes, where Anacortes is today. And that was called Kolachich, which is straight Salish for ironwood. So at the time, this whole channel, both sides of it, were covered in ironwood. Ocean spray, I guess is what you call it. You plant people. So, but that's what lined the channel on both sides. So again, the village was so big, it moved over, so there were two villages. And then when the Europeans came, the epidemics came with them, and the population was decimated and wound up moving to Samish Island. So that's how we wound up over on Samish Island. All right, Samish at the end of traditional times. For time immemorial, the Samish lived in what became western Skagit County. These locations include villages near Deception Pass, Guemes Island, Lopez Island, Samish Island, and of course Fidalgo Island. By the mid-1800s, the Samish population had dwindled, and many were living in the village back on Samish Island. And that, again, is because of the not being having any protection against smallpox and measles. Samish Island was no longer a safe place by the 1800s. Much of western Skagit County was salt marsh. That's the other thing you guys need to remember. All of this is diked off. Where Bayview is, where Samish Island is, it was all salt marsh. Where the golf course is, water went through there. That's all diked up, right? So when they got here, they expanded the farmland by diking it up. At one time, they were going to dike all the way to Hat Island, and they didn't do it, thank goodness, but that was their intent, was to dike it all up and make it farmland. Samish Island was no longer a safe place. Much western, salt marsh. Samish Island was one location where settlers could homestead. And again, because it was all marsh, that was the only land that was cleared. And why was it cleared? Because the tribe was there, they were living there. The homesteaders didn't want the Indian neighbors. Settlers desired Samish land on Samish Island, and they took it. This was the only Samish village at the time, so they would need somewhere else to live. So really that was the end of it. I heard stories about Annie Lyons going back and living on the island, and they'd run her off and she'd come back. And her father was Harry Samish, and he's actually buried over on Samish Island. They call it a cemetery, but it's really a mass grave site. When the settlers moved in, again, the village, if you go on to Samish Island and you take the first right, the village was kind of down there on Scott's Point, where the slough went through. Here's a picture of the island from Samish Gold Memories from Lawrence Hansen. And this is what it looked like. Again, here's the, they're trying to open this back up. There's a group of, what are they called? Yeah, it's an environmental group, but they're trying to open this back up. And here's Scott's Point. The village was right in here where the, I think the Church of Latter-day Saints has that property today. And they're really good about the allowing the tribe to come and visit the mass gravesite on the end of Scott Point there. So they needed a new home. Traditional way of life was becoming difficult to maintain for many Samish. A shrinking population meant that it would be more difficult to fish, gather resources, and live traditionally. Traditional Samish needed to live, or needed land to live, and food determined which land. Samish moved to different locations depending on where the salmon were in season, which plants were available, and where shellfish were to be found. If camas was in season, then many of the Samish could be found on March's Point, where camas once grew. Samish needed to find a place to settle that had no claims, and where the neighbors would be accepting. And so we're traveling a little bit more, getting closer to more modern times. So I asked Jason why he put this picture in here, and he goes, I wanted to demonstrate what the settlers were up against as far as cutting the trees down to clear the land, as opposed to taking the tribal land that's already cleared with the camas on it. So that was Jason. And the other interesting thing that I learned from my archivist, Jason, was this picture of the guy on the stump. That's Tracy Powell, and that's the stump that where the tree where the Maiden of Deception Pass came from, that's out at Rosario Beach. So that's the tree that the Maiden came from, the stump. Which I just found that out. I go, okay, Jason, why is that in there? He goes, well, and I said, well, this is a better story than just a picture of the guy with the stump, right? So here we are. There was a village on the south end of Guemes called Schwaim, as I said, and it was a fairly good-sized village, but it had been abandoned for the village on Samish Island. Guemes was also a fairly safe place to live, offering a place to hide from the northern Indians. So this is where I think Jason got this is a little bit out of order, because hiding from the northern Indians, we had already signed the treaty in 1855 saying that we would enslave. That didn't mean that, keep in mind that Russia owned Alaska at this time, right? So they weren't bound by US law. The Canadian government really didn't control the ones that were in BC either. So they still kept coming down here enslaving. But once the Indian Wars were settled here, there was a group of northern raiders from Cape Alaska that came down here. Do you guys know the story about Eby's Landing? So Colonel Eby was part of the militia that was fighting the hostile Indians here in the Northwest. Eby's Landing is on Whidbey Island, you all know. Have you been to the blockhouse? Have you seen Eby's blockhouse? Well, they were hiding in that when those northern raiders came. So the year after the Indian Wars were completed, a group of these northern raiders came down, and they wound up down at, what's the tribe? Down by Edmonds. No, beyond Toledo. So one of the Squalons. No. Anyway, they were down further south towards Olympia, and the tribes down there went to the U.S. government and said, hey, these guys are down here slaving. We signed the treaty, said we wouldn't do it anymore. You got to do something about it. So the U.S. government sent a ship from San Francisco up here, and they interceded with these northern raiders, and they actually attacked them and shelled them on the beach, destroyed their canoes, and killed like 30 of them, including a high-ranking chief from up there. Well, they went back home. Well, they didn't really they had no way of getting home, so the U.S. government took them back to Vancouver Island and said, you guys take them. The Canadians said they're not ours. They belong further north up in Russia. And so they gave them money for new canoes and outfitted them from Vancouver. But they were so mad they came back the next year, and they were looking for a high-ranking official to take as a trophy. And they wound up attacking Eby's Landing. They climbed up the cliffs. Eby was home. They took him outside, killed him, cut his head off, and took his head and scalped him and took him back to Cape Alaska. So that's kind of what was going on here, right? So that's why I said this really isn't fitting when we're talking about 1880s, when the village was made here. This is actually 1850, 1860, right? And again, the American Civil War is going on. So a lot of stuff happened.
Tom, didn't you talk about the government actually went and talked to the people?
Yeah.
Apologized for...
So they bartered with the Plinkets and returned Eby's skull with his ears back to him. They gave him like a handful of blankets and a bunch of other stuff.
Well, you were just saying too that somebody that just like 2 months ago or something went up in the Navy, sent people up there.
Oh, yeah, I saw an article in the Alaska newspaper that the U.S. Navy apologized to the citizens or the community of Cape Alaska for going up and shelling their village. After all this happened, they went back up and shelled their village up in Cape Alaska and destroyed all their canoes. They had just finally gotten their first canoe back in 150 years since the Navy had shelled it, but they apologized for that. And the reason why the Navy was up there, because they were down here raiding, and that's why they shelled their canoes, because they didn't want them coming down here, continuing those practices. And, you know, we carve welcome poles here, right? They do house posts and all kinds of figures up there. They were so mad that they actually made figures of like the president at the time and to humiliate him because their whole economy was ruined because the slave trade had been stopped. And one of the slaves actually went into the magistrate in Homer, Alaska, and sued for his freedom because he had been taken from down here. And he had talked about flat-headed Indians from like central Washington that were slave too. So the whole network of slavery was like, yeah, something else. It's just amazing that the whole economy was built around that. Where the heck am I? Okay, yeah, like I said, I think this is actually out of turn, so I'm going to move on. Guemes was also located near good fishing spots. You guys ever fish out in front of the Indian village? I bet y'all have. Right? Springers?
It's
Yeah.
supposed to be a good place for halibut out there too.
Don't be giving them anything away or you'll steal them. And finally, isolation. No large settlements had been established on the island, so settlers were few and easier to coexist with. And that's a real fact. And I saw this photo up earlier. You guys have all seen this picture. You know that's West Beach, right? And there's the village. And so they had quite a few outbuildings as well as the main house. And the house stretched across both of the homesteads.
You see, it's been logged off there at the top.
Oh yeah. Yeah, by the 1880s, right? Yeah, we're taking advantage of all of that. Perhaps the most positive draw to Guemes Island was that Samish had some relations here. The reason why Guemes residents were more friendly was that some of the settlers had Samish wives. Imagine that, you know. I told you my great-grandfather and his brother came here. Well, who the heck's here are you going to marry, right? There's nothing but Indians here. So they actually met a couple gals over at Samish when they were on their way up to the Fraser to look for gold. Of course, they didn't strike it rich. So they came back and married them and homesteaded here. That's why I'm here today. The ones we know about are the Matthews. So let me back up. I told you about my dad's ancestry. Let me tell you about my grandmother's ancestry. So my grandmother, she was Jim Matthews' daughter. And again, Jim was one of the homesteaders here on Guemes and yeah, married a Samish gal and homesteaded here. The Blackington families, Lucius Blackington, both men homesteaded on Guemes and both settlers had native wives. It was more than a little likely that these women helped bring about the new Samish village on Guemes Island. The reason we know these men were in favor of the village is because the homestead applications. So here's a picture of Mary Blackington and Lucius Blackington. And I think, Pat, that's in front of the post office here.
And Lucius was,
the third postmaster.
if you look at the plaque in the store, of all postmasters, he's listed on it.
All right. So here's these two gentlemen here. And the only reason why they were able to do this is the government's trying to figure out, okay, we've got all these Indians on a reservation now. Now what the heck are we going to do with them, right? How do we break up that structure, society that they exist under? So how do we do that? What's the best way to do it? I know, we'll make them citizens by allowing them to homestead. So they divided the reservations up into allotments. So it was called the Dawes Act, Indian Allotment Act. You guys know about that? So, yeah, after all the white homesteaders, they did open it up. And again, the main goal there was to subdivide the reservations and assimilate the Indians into mainstream society. I don't think they wanted to do that. I gotta quit doing that, I keep losing my spot. One interesting portion of the application is the testimony that the applicants have given up all their traditional tribal ways and relations. Other records show this wasn't really the case. The second interesting fact is the witnesses, several different residents from Guemes Island, testified in favor of Kalitchnoff and Watch Out. That witnesses include James Matthews, again, my grandmother's dad, and Lucius Blackington.
My great-great-grandfather.
And here's Billy Edwards, brother to Bob and Charlie Edwards. And here's the actual applications that they filled out for the homesteads. So here's the excerpts from the homestead documents. From handwritten documents, testimony, Bob Kalitchnach, where he was applying for the homestead on Guemes. I do solemnly swear that I am an Indian formerly of the Stick Samish tribe, that I have abandoned my relations with that tribe and adopted the habits and pursuant to civilized life. From one of the homestead documents from Sam Watchout, man who witnessed the document, all from Guemes Island, F.T. Matthews, Thomas Jenkins, John McLosh, and Lucius Blackington. So again, these were their relatives that they're helping them out, right? So they had a place to live. So it really wasn't a homestead.
Tom, I have a quick one.
Yeah.
What is Stick Samish? Could you
So,
explain
so in, I think it's like 1855, right around when all this other stuff was going on, when they moved back to Samish Island, they actually merged with and depending on what dialect you want to use, using straight Salish dialect, it's the Nuaha tribe, or if you're Upper Skagit or Swinomish, it's Dawaha tribe. So basically the Samish Basin up above, what is it, Jarman Prairie? Do you know where Jarman Prairie is? It's like almost not quite to Cedar Woolley, flats up that way. Blanchard, that area, yeah, there was villages, Stick Samish villages up in Blanchard. But they'd actually merged into one tribe. So here we go. It was not a barn for storing crops. This was a building used in the traditional Indian way. Multiple families would live there, and there would be gatherings held there in the house as well. The longhouse was built over the property lines between Kalitchnach and Washoe's property. This showed a respect for the Samish traditions, where no one person owned the land. Land was responsibility of the family and the tribe. So again, you hear it, and if you look at the picture, it's just a big rectangular, like a barn-looking house. So in this presentation a little bit later, we'll talk about Professor Wayne Settles. I mentioned him, he wrote his thesis on the tribe and did all these interviews with these elders. And I met with him, I had the honor to meet with him and Bill Holmes, and I go, Wayne, what does Guanquangala mean, right? So that's the name of the West Shore village, Guanquangala. And I go, what the heck does that mean? And he goes, I'm not really sure. I asked our linguist as well, and they had a different explanation than Wayne Suttles did. And Wayne told me that the name of it was cow house because it looked like a barn. They wanted people to think that they had converted to regular civilized lifestyle and it was built like a barn. So that's my theory of why it's called that. Now, I've heard it, the name be described something else, but that's what Professor Settles told me was what Guangguangha. Traditional times were gone, but the new village was a conscious effort to try to keep something of a tradition alive in a rapidly changing world. While reef netting was probably not possible, other less labor-intensive fishing such as seining or trolling was. Through competition with settlers and canneries would make independent fishing problematic. Some Samish would go to work for the canneries. There is documentation of Samish working for outfits such as Fidalgo Island Packers and Alaska Packers. And that actually went on for quite some time. I know that they, before the invention of the, I can't say it, can I? Because it's politically incorrect. But they used local,
A metal headlock.
yeah, the machine that cut the heads off the fish. And they had a derogatory term for it that I shouldn't say, but they used the tribal folks in the canneries extensively for labor until that machine was invented. Why the longhouse? The answer is hinted at the letter from the BIA farmer in charge at Tulalip. BIA farmer would write their superiors about how much progress their changes on the reservation were making and what other things were transpiring. In his letter, the Tulalip farmer was more than a little irritated since many of his charge had taken off for a big gathering on Guemes Island. Tribes from all over were going, and there were little that he could do about it. The BIA and missionaries could not easily put a stop to traditional gatherings when they were off the reservation. So for a time, Indians could dance, sing, and celebrate in the old ways. And they outlawed that on the reservations. The ones that kept those practices alive on the reservations actually dug pit houses and hid underground to do those ceremonies and practice their traditional ways. And they didn't have to here at Guemes. They could just come over here and stay until they kicked you out, right? So here's a letter from John O'Keefe from 1880. Mr. O'Keefe was an agent in charge at Tulalip. He writes at length about the Indians in his charge, following a bit of what he wrote about the potlatch at Samish. Great potlatch or gift feast at Samish. Situated about 12 miles from the Swinomish Reservation, towards the latter half of this month, the Indians on the Samish Flats opened their large potlatch house and invited Indians from all over the tribes of the Northwest. Tribes do not get more traditional than this. Despite opposition, Samish held potlatches, and there was little the agent at Tulalip could do about this except happily write a letter. And again, they couldn't practice down there. And by 1880, you guys are well aware about the residential schools in BC and the schools here in the U.S. and the mistreatment of those kids that got shipped out is heartbreaking. I actually went to Tulalip. Our school, the school that they sent the Indian kids to from this whole area was down at Tulalip. And so the Secretary of the Interior was doing a tour, and she visited Tulalip, and they had pictures and they had witnesses that kids, well, they were kids, but elders now that had been subjected to those schools talk about their experience, and it was just horrific. It was not a good thing, and you know, yeah, the Catholic Church is kind of behind all that, so you kind of got to wonder. I will leave it at that. Visitors in the village, some Samish citizens knew about the village. One of these was Mary Bone, and I don't know if, I know some of you here remember Pete and Mary. I used to call her my Aunt Mary. She was actually my grandmother's, or my dad's cousin. She was my grandmother's niece. But Mary had married Pete, and they actually lived on Eden Road where Rosie and Bill live today. That little house that's there, that was their first house. And then Pete did pretty good for himself, and he bought a property down at the village site, built that 3-story house down there. I got to tell you though, I don't know if you guys remember, Mary raised pug dogs, and she sold them. That was her income. And those things used to scare the heck out of me when I was little. We'd go visit her and they'd just come up and, pug dogs. During the 1970s, the Samish Council gathered information about the history of the tribe. One of the people they talked to was Mary, who testified in the 70s, noted not only where the village was, but she believed that one of her uncles visited the village when he was a child. One of the unusual bits of evidence was from the 1905 Polk directory. One line said that anything sent to the Indian village on Guemes was to be mailed to Guemes.
Now, somebody found some old postcards that were sent to Mary, and it was addressed third house from the post office. That's all it said, there's no address.
So, and here's the excerpt from that. So kind of cool. So many years later in the 1940s, and here's where I'll talk a little bit about anthropologist Wayne Settles. He interviewed Indians from several different reservations and reserves, which included the Swinomish Reservation and the Lummi Reservation. Among the elders he interviewed was Charlie Edwards, who was the youngest half-brother of Bob and Bill Edwards. Charlie Edwards was in his 80s by the 1940s, which would have made him a young man in the 20s when the village was founded. Edwards was a tremendous source of information on the Samish tribe, and in particular, Settles learned about the composition of the new Guemes Village Longhouse. Charlie remembered that 9 different families were residing in the house, and that the house was built across the property lines. Settles would include this information as well as more detailed analysis of what Charlie remembered in his doctoral thesis, Economic Life of the Coast Salish of Harrow and Rosario Straits, 1951. So if you get a chance and you want to learn more, that's where you gotta go. So unfortunately, they didn't really understand how property was taken care of, and they didn't pay the taxes on it. So the village would eventually be abandoned. What we don't know is why. But around 1912, the property was claimed because of taxes. Residents left the village for a number of possible reasons. One was likely lack of work. Fishing was largely taken over by the canneries, which proceeded to damage the fishing runs. One thing that canneries were good at was trapping out fishermen, and once more canneries were out of business, their employees would look for work elsewhere. Other reasons might have been age. Living in a traditional way was not appealing to everyone, and the younger generation would seek opportunities elsewhere. and of most traditions were the older generation who were passing away. And that's kind of the story with everything, including your guys' society here. So if you guys got something to share, you guys need to share it so it doesn't get lost. So
One
that,
thing about the fishing industry is that when it first started here, they were using the Indians to help in the canneries. But then what happened? They got Chinese to work for cheaper, and I'm going, how did they work for cheaper?
you guys all know about Smuggler Kelly, right? Kelly's Point's named for him. Well, the stories are that he used to use that point to drop the Chinese immigrants that he was smuggling in, as well as, remember that Prohibition was going on, so he was bootlegging too. And I think you guys know where his little cabin is, where the beach is, right? Everybody should know that story.
Everybody left the fishing industry and went into the hop fields, because they had hops all the way from Oregon into Canada before Prohibition. And that was a big thing. I mean, it was huge. And then when Prohibition came, then they lost their jobs again.
All right. Since the population of the village was fluid, it was difficult to know just who was living there. However, we do know that some of the residents went after the village was lost. There is a documentation of Billy and Bob Edwards, who resided in a number of places on Fidalgo Island, which probably include the settlement near the canneries on the north shore of Fidalgo Island. So we're talking about out by the ferry, the state ferry landing, right? Mentioned in the newspaper articles of being the last chief of the Samish tribe. One of the descendants of Sam Watchout was found in Canada by Ken Hansen. While there was an interview, the record of what was said has yet to be located. Some of the former village residents went to live at Swinomish. Charlie Edwards did, as did Annie Lyons, daughter of Harry Samish. Miss Lyons lived other places before the reservation, but that is where she eventually took over her father's allotment. And here's some pictures. There's Charlie by the question mark 2. So that's Charlie Edwards there. So that question mark 2 canoe, he built famous racing canoes. They call them war canoes, right? They had races. And the picture in the middle is Bob Edwards, the last chief. But this canoe is in Virginia. So the Edwards family, it's funny, we have a relationship with the Anacortes Museum curator. I don't know if you guys know him or not, Brett Lunsford.
Yeah.
Really great guy to talk to, wealth of information. One of his workers was back east in Virginia and went to this maritime ship museum, small craft museum in Virginia. And there's that canoe. And so we wrote a letter to the museum. We haven't heard back from them saying, hey, you know, we'd really love to get this canoe back if you guys want to, but it's like 42 feet long and about this wide, right? One of the 13 manors. And there's Annie Lyons. And again, I heard stories of them running her off of Samish Island. And, yeah, kind of a sad story. Lost but not forgotten. So despite the passing of the new Guemes village, it was not forgotten. When Samish citizens found themselves in court, they would testify about the village. Sarfield Kavanaugh spoke about the village and related how he had visited the site and measured out the longhouse footprint. Annie Lyons, Bill and Bob and Charlie Edwards also testified. Wayne Suttles interviewed Charlie Edwards, and he learned about the village. Suttles included the village in his thesis, and he would testify about it multiple times over his lifetime. it would be during the 1970s and 80s that the history of the New Guemes village became more relevant. Before recognition, the village was part of the Samish's tale of loss. When the recognition struggle happened, the village was evidence of the Samish's continued existence. The 1979 petition for recognition, written by Ken Hansen with the help of the Samish families, would pull together a number of sources, documents, what was known about the new village, helping both the Samish citizens and the reluctant BIA to learn about an almost forgotten chapter in Samish history. So again, here's the cover of the petition, and there's a picture of Ken Hansen. I don't know if any of you remember Ken, but he was a warrior for sure. He fought to the end. All right, legacy of the village. Would not be until the aggression to say that without the New Guemes village, the Samish Indian nation would not exist today. The village was a way of preserving some traditions while adapting to a new way of life. And the village came about through the concerted effort of people acting as a tribe. While the village may have been lost, Samish remembered, and that loss motivated Samish to go to court and seek compensation for their lost lands. And so we actually went to court twice. The first time was Duwamish at all. The tribes in the area felt like they weren't compensated fully for all the lands that they had signed over during the treaty, and so they took the federal government to court. And that court case was Duwamish at all. We sued the federal government in that case, and we were not successful. But a few years later, the Indian Court of Claims case came about, and we were actually prevailed in that case, and we were awarded $5,000 for the lands we gave up in the treaty. And I talked about the large, vast area. We were awarded $5,000 for this island and Samish Island. So I'm happy to say that the federal government still retains that $5,000 because we refused to take, well, I shouldn't say that. We refused to take it, and they refused to give it to us, because if they gave it to us, that would acknowledge that we were a tribe. So they said, oh, we'll just give it to you all individually, right? Individual Indians. Well, you can imagine what a task that would be. And at the time, they were talking $5,000, but we refused it, and they still have it. We got a letter, I want to say this year, saying that they wanted to invest it in a new investment scheme. That $5,000 today is about $135,000. So you could even buy a house with that now. So, but that's where we are with the lands lost. So, but with all of this research that we did on the village, it was a big part of our re-recognition. And it eventually helped the Samish achieve re-recognition through it, although it took over 80 years from the time that the village was abandoned. So, I mean, we've got quite a tortured history, if you will, but some of it's really good, and this is the good, fun part of it. Some of the things that went along with that, as with any Indian village, the New Guemes village had a cemetery. There was little evidence of what it looked like, since the cemetery was vandalized repeatedly. And you all heard these stories about Bubbles, right? You all know who Bubbles was? About her digging up, digging up graves by the moonlight. And so apparently they were in the habit of putting coins on their eyes, so she would be up there trying to get these old coins. And if you ever went to her house, she had skulls on her fireplace, right? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? She had the only pool on the island, so all the kids would go there and swim at her place. And I remember that freaked me out seeing those skulls. I don't know what her family did with those, but yeah, she was pretty proud of her activities. She's a pretty mischievous gal. Quite a character, really. Where am I? Eventually, concerning residents of the island requested residents of the Swinomish Reservation to remove the grave markers and remains. This was done and were reburied at the Swinomish Reservation. And this is pretty common. I know that we actually have a cemetery out at Blanchard as well, and some of the folks they knew it was going to be abandoned, so they exhumed their relatives and moved them closer so they could be with them. And I think this is probably the same case. And
So when did that happen?
when did
When did they remove them?
it was after the village went down, so probably right like 1910, 1920, something like that, I would think. Probably after the Morrisons bought their half and the others got all cut up where y'all live now. So, and it's funny, I used to be a hunter. I don't really hunt anymore because I'm old and kind of gimpy, but I used to deer hunt on the island here. And I remember, if you're a hunter, you need to know where all the boundaries are so that you're not trespassing. And so I remembered seeing this on a Metzger map. And so here's an excerpt from the Metzger map. And y'all know the Morrisons, right?
Yep.
So here's all your guys' houses on where the village is, or was. Here's where the cemetery was. And I talked to Jim. I ran into him. I was pulled up on the road, and I was looking to try to figure out exactly where that cemetery was. Jim knew exactly where it was. He goes, "Oh yeah," he goes, "I can show you where it is." I should have taken him up on it since he's no longer with us. But he goes, "Yeah," he goes, "I actually have one of the posts that was around the cemetery, the fence that was around the cemetery." So I would love to talk to his family and find out. But you can kind of see where it is. So before the corner, right? So I think his driveway that goes up the hill is probably right here. So it's just probably past his driveway. So next time you guys go around that corner, take a look. You might see something, or you might not want to see something. So, little remains of the Guemes Village Longhouse and other outbuildings, and again you saw those in the photograph. However, in 2003, Samish learned of a surviving artifact from the house. Samish citizens and staff were entertaining Wayne Settles and Bill Holmes and their wives Shirley and Marty at the old administration building, and Samish learned about the surviving house post from the Guemes Village site from Bill Holmes. And so again, we put up poles on our buildings, and typically they're carved or they're painted. And it's interesting how this all transpired, and I'm going to keep going here. The house post was removed by Harry Smith. So Harry Smith was an interesting guy that lived in Anacortes. He's most famous for his folk singing recordings. He was an eccentric. He experimented with LSD. I mean, he did all of these recordings of. And there's a museum, a Harry Smith Museum back east. And while he was here in Anacortes, he got some recording equipment, and he actually went to the UW, and he went to the reservations and recorded some of the old timers singing their Sion songs, which today you would never get to do that. But at those times, it wasn't a big thing. So he actually, I've heard recordings from the burg of one of Annie Lyon's songs, and I can't remember who the other person's song was, but it was his Sion song. Kind of a unique guy, but he went around to these reservations and made these recordings. He found out about the village on West Shore, that it had been abandoned. And so he came over here to Guemes, and there was actually 2 posts left of the longhouse. And he cut those 2 posts down and took them, and he took them to the museum in Seattle, which it was the Burke now, but it wasn't the Burke then. And so when we found out about the fact that he had done this, we spent quite a bit of time out at the Burke trying to find these, and we were able to locate one of the house posts. So we got one of them back, one of them still missing.
There is a book that Brett Lunsford wrote about Eric Smith too. And he's traveled all around talking about it. They had a big thing in Brussels.
Sorry,
Belgium.
I didn't want to go ahead too far. Okay, after extensive dialogue with the museum, the house post would be returned to the Samish in 2005, and it would live at Fidalgo Bay RV Park, our convention center, until 2018. It was moved to Summit Park campus where it resides today. And there is the house post that was returned. So that was at the village on West Shore, one of the posts. And that symbol, we believe, is one of the owners of the plank house, his power symbol. So Indian doctors use this device called squidalage, and this symbol is a kind of a representation of that squidalage. So it's a real powerful thing. And I thought, why in the heck would those 2 posts still be there, right? Because if the thing was made out of cedar, and I talked to Pete Bone's second wife, Jackie. You guys remember Jackie Bond? She goes, I think Pete cut all those logs up and split them up because they were all old growth cedar, right? Why wouldn't you, right? They abandoned them, why not cut them up? But these 2 posts remain, and I couldn't figure out why they wouldn't have cut those posts up until I picked that up and moved it around. That's a piece of fir, and it was heavy as heck. And so Pete didn't want it because it was fir. So that's why it was still there, and that's how we got it back, I think. So this is a good picture here. So this is actually, this is Wayne Suttles here, and this is Bill Holm. And Bill is a famous artist that did a lot of work up and down the coast. He's probably more renowned for his Southeast Alaska art, but he was one of the folks that helped us. This is Jan Flagg. She was Jan is still with us, and she was our enrollment officer at the time. That guy there with the dark hair, if you can believe it, that was actually me. I snuck away. I was at work, and I was so compelled to be at this meeting, I snuck out of work so I could be here and talk to these 2 guys. This was our resident archaeologist, Dr. Megan Jones, and this is Mary Hansen here. And so we had this lunch and met with Bill and Wayne trying to find that house post and the other one. Again, this symbol is a power symbol. The other post that was taken had a power symbol as well. It was like a rainbow. And we believe that that's the symbol of the sockeye salmon. Whoever owned that was their power symbol. Surviving names. One of the interesting things about Guemes Island is that they persist the Indian Village label on West Beach. The village was first noted on the coastal maps that you guys saw at the beginning in the late 19th century, and the village can even be found on Google Maps. Guemes Village was persistent on maps and far longer than the village itself survived on Guemes Island. So it's just kind of funny. I mean, your roads are right, you even call it the village. So this is the last slide. So this is the information that is available out there. And again, Wayne Suttle's Coast Salish essay from 1987. Ken's petition for federal recognition from '79. And then the one that you really want to read is Economic Life of the Coast Salish of Harrow and Rosario Straits from '51. And then The Shed Roof House in A Time of Gathering. And again, Professor Settles. So that's all I have for you guys. This has been really fun, and I hope you guys learned a little bit more about the tribe and the beautiful island that you all live on.
We do have a surprise for Tom. This is Pat Richley Erickson. So this is our surprise for this evening.
So you talked about the returning of things to the tribe.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I have something to read. We went through the
Bring it
container.
over to the, I'm thinking bring it over to the camera.
Yeah, you got it.
All right. What this is, you can lift it out so they can see what's in there. The box was specially made.
Yeah. You guys know what this is?
It's a river anchor.
It's either for a small canoe or even could be for a net, a gill net.
Right.
You know, that was our technology as well, gill netting, reef netting.
I have one.
Yes.
I now know who it goes to.
Well, there you go. And we would love to give you credit as well, so that people do know where these things come back from. So my hands go up to you, thank you.
So this was found by the Jerry Tuttle family in about the 70s, 1970s, and they had it in their possession in about 1990s or so. They took it to the Burke Museum and had them evaluate it. And they said, yep, that's a fish net weight.
Mm-hmm.
Been used since about 1520 through about 1945. But just to hold that,
Oh, yeah.
it's just, we're just, this represents our, big museums are supposed to return things. We're just a tiny little historical society, but this is who we are. We want to build.
I am speechless, just like that young man that brought the mortar. He found this on North Beach. It's a mortar for grinding that camas so that you can have your diet. Yeah, so again, this like warms my heart immensely. I can't tell you how much this means. We wanted to share with you guys too that a blanket that you can put up here or whatever you guys want to do, but
Hey, Tom, share who did the design.
pardon me?
Share who did the design.
Oh, you guys, a Guemes resident, Bill Bailey made the sign for us. So the design, of course, this is the Collinson, right, the eagle. And then the Kohamitchin, the killer whale. And this symbolizes our bone games. It's stick games, right, Indian gambling. So these are the sticks, one's marked, one's not, and you hide them. Guys, you shouldn't get into that.
So another couple quick announcements, so thanks for coming, and then we do have cookbooks for sale over here. There's a lot of the new cookbooks over here if you guys want to check that out. And then my mom has a question.
And Pat has something to say too.
And Pat has something to say. Go ahead.
I just wanted everybody to know that there is a thing called the Washington Digital Newspapers. All of the Anacortes Americans are scanned from the 1800s to now. All you have to do is put in your name. I found out that two of my aunts were the first bluebirds on Guemes Island in the 1920s. But I mean, it's just, you get on it and you can't get off. As she told me.
It's funny, the last time I was actually here, we held a general membership meeting. Since my brother and my sister and I own my grandparents' place here on the island, we were able to rent this, and a lot of our citizens had never come over to Guemes. And so I got to tell you the story. We took, we have the Head Start building and program in Anacortes, the only one in Anacortes. So we brought the kids' bus over here, right? Little kids' bus. And we pile all these full-size people on the bus. And it's like, okay, we're going to give them a tour of the island and talk about all the different locations. So I had to be the tour guide. And one of our citizens was from, she lived at Malahat. Her name was Lena Daniels. And she did not speak English. She spoke straight Salish. Her two sons, Roy and Randy, I mean, she had to have been in her 90s when she came. And this was probably 15 years ago or more. But her two sons translate English for her. And so we went ahead and went around the island, and we got to where the village is on West Shore. And so we stopped the bus, and I tell everybody that she got all excited and started telling her sons that she had actually been here as a little girl and remembered being here. And then she started talking about Clark Point. And she said that's where the wild man lived, at Clark Point. Apparently they used to come and visit at the village. So guys, keep that story in mind too.
Pat's mother was born here. She's now 97. So we ask her as many questions as we can, and her mind is pretty good. But, you don't know what to ask, and you don't know what's relevant, and you don't know what you might say that she goes, oh yeah, she told Pat, we tell her.
I don't know which one.
Where the lady that didn't speak English.
Oh, did she talk about that she would go with her grandma and they would walk down the beach on South Beach all the way to the end. And there was a lady down there that just spoke straight Samish. She didn't know, she couldn't speak English. And she said, I was like 3 years old or 4 years old. So I went back to the old, census records, and I found out who it was, but I've since forgotten. But that's, I actually did some digging, and I found out that that's the person that she was talking about.
So I have a question because you had a picture of the woolly dog and didn't refer, and I'm wondering, was that the old village, not the new one, and was that part of the economy? You talked about the slave trade.
Absolutely, right? So you think about what you need to survive, right? And so we talked before the meeting about blankets, the importance of blankets, and the fact that the natives here didn't what do you make blankets out of, right? Wool. Well, where are you going to get your wool from? Sheep, right? Well, there's no sheep, mountain sheep, right? Mountain goats, you could get wool from them like they do up on the Big Island. They had their own economy with dogs here. And that was probably at Schwaimet. And it was a special breed of dogs and they would make these beautiful blankets out of these woolly dogs. And once the Hudson Bay blankets got here, wool, we don't need these dogs anymore. And that may have contributed to why there were packs of dogs and why they called this Dog Island, because they roamed around the island. Because they didn't need them anymore, right?
Thank you.
They actually went to the Bird Museum and they did some testing on some of the blankets and they found dog hair in it.
Yes.
When you were growing up, were you proud of your heritage?
It's interesting that you asked that question, because you saw during my presentation of how they were mistreated and abused. It wasn't a good thing to be a native person, right? You didn't have any rights. You couldn't vote. They didn't really, the Indians did not get any recognition until they came back from World War I, right? That's when they actually got the vote. That's when you ladies got the vote, was after that, because they felt like they had to do something for them. But no, that was one of the reasons why these mixed blood families were living on Guemes, is because they were part of the community. You know, and there were a lot of them over here. I mean, a lot of them.
So,
All of my grandmother's family were here.
so when you were in school, were you
Proud?
to be?
I remember the first time that I was extremely proud of that, and it was after the AIM movement happened, after the second battle of Wounded Knee happened. Then when the civil rights all happened, like in the 68, 69, right? Vietnam was going on. Civil rights all happened, Martin Luther King, all of that kind of changed people's perception, or allowed people to be proud of who they were. But yeah, people were hiding. People hid there a lot, and that's why a lot of the history is not available, because people didn't want to talk about it. My grandmother was ashamed of being Native, and she tried to hide that, right, that she was Native. It's sad.
I was born and raised on the next door neighbors. Mary Gail and I were best
Oh,
friends.
yeah, I went to her wedding when she married Bob Cameron.
Oh, yeah.
I remember she gave me a kiss and I was so embarrassed. She was such so beautiful in her wedding.
Well, she was the most beautiful young woman I ever met.
Yeah, she's one of my cousins. Yeah.
Yeah, we lived next door to Schultz. I'm a Schultz.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Your dad was super cool. Anytime I'd see him, I'd stop and chat him up. All right, you guys.
Thank you.